Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Genevieve Westcott with your latest financial news from across New Zealand and around the globe. Joining us today, Green MP Steffan Browning, spokesperson for agriculture, fisheries, organics, GE, forestry, and biosecurity. Steffan, great to have you on the show. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, Genevieve.
Boy, you've got a lot of areas that you are responsible for. One thing that's very near and dear to your heart, I know the issue of New Zealand king salmon. What's the latest there? They want to expand their salmon farms, of course, and you don't think it's such a hot idea.
No, I don't think the current expansion is such a hot idea. 8 of their application sites are in an area that's prohibited to marine farming under the zoning of the Marlborough District Council's plan, the Resource Management Plan. That plan took industry and the community a long time to develop. Industry got to effectively double up in terms of the spatial area that they had in the Sounds, and the other area was left as balance of good natural area, wilderness features, and places for people to go without industry being there. So in terms of a spatial planning point of view, what they are proposing, and the fact that the EPA's Board of Inquiry is sitting as we speak on this, what they're proposing would actually just totally attack the integrity of that plan. And if that was to go ahead, you'd say, wherever in New Zealand would you not put aquaculture? I'd like to see aquaculture develop further. It certainly has in Marlborough, but there will be a time that any specific area has reached its limit.
But wait a minute, let me be devil's advocate here. This is a country that desperately needs to grow its economy, correct? And New Zealand King Salmon says that over the next 25 years, if they get the go-ahead for more salmon farms, it's worth $880 million to people like you and me. Isn't that a serious consideration?
The theoretical economic benefit is a real consideration. I think they're over-promising, both on jobs and remembering that 51% of this company is the Malaysian Tiong family, which is pretty interesting when in terms of its history and track record in terms of rainforest clearance and this and that. This is a polluting industry. It's not all sweetness and dreams as such at all. It's a very polluting industry, and it could have major effect on the Marlborough Sounds as well. I believe fish farming has a place, but it's not carrying on, adding on top of in the same area. We already have a substantive enough aquaculture industry in Marlborough, particularly in terms of fish farming, that has effects that I don't believe have been properly quantified as yet. And the same with green shell mussel. We can do a lot more with green shell mussel, and in fact I was with one of the Wakatu board members last night at dinner, and they're looking at how they can add value to their existing product. So it's not about cramming in more and more and more. It's what we can do with it and how we can maximise the value out of it.
It's interesting. There have been 1,400 submissions now before the EPA, 800 against it, 400 supporting it. Are the nays going to take it, do you think, in the end?
I'm optimistic that the Board of Inquiry will look out for the Marlborough District Council's view and their plan, and keep that balance so that we can have good tourism, we can have good recreation, and we can have a real solid chunk of aquaculture as we have there. I'm optimistic that they will see the community right, because the community really struggles with these processes. It actually affects their futures. There's tourist operators in amongst there as well. There are the people that in places like Picton and Havelock that don't just need industrial features as in terms of employment. There's a lot of employment through recreation and tourism as well, and we have to really be cognizant of that.
Yeah, although with our high dollar, there aren't as many tourists, certainly from overseas, coming to visit us. And we see that even in Auckland, the city now is trying to lure domestic customers in. So I wonder realistically, you know, how much money is tourism going to pump into that part of the country compared to salmon? The
Marlborough Sounds will always have its base of people coming to enjoy it for its features. And I think so there is a base to add to that. we can add to that by advertising, by promoting the best aspects of it, and that isn't industrial features in terms of salmon farming. It's an ugly thing in its own right. Interesting when you go for your first tours and look at it, but my acquaintances that have got significant scientific understanding of showing that the negative effects of the nutrient loading into the sounds, something like 60,000, equivalent of 60,000 dairy cows basically crapping into the Marlborough Sounds. If it was on land, they'd have all sorts of mitigation, there'd be restraints on leachate and whatever, but you've got that huge amount of nutrient going in there in a raw sewage form going into the Marlborough Sounds. This is, there's already a lot, and this would be a major add-on that could have very negative effect, could have negative effects for mussel farming as well. At the biotech conference yesterday, there was presentations on aquaculture, and some of the idea is to go out into the ocean, further out, where you don't have these effects on the localised areas where in fact you've got more biodiversity issues, more fisheries issues inshore. If you take the aquaculture offshore, slightly more oceanic, then we'll get rid of a lot of these problems.
Thanks, Steffan. We'll talk about that conference after the break. Come back quick. Welcome back to Money Talks. We're here with Steffan Browning, Green MP and spokesperson for biosecurity, among other things. Now, you've spent the week at a big agricultural conference all about biotechnology in Rotorua. You're upset that the government has put money into this because you think it's just a way to introduce GM and GE foods into the country. Tell me more.
Yes, we questioned the amount of money the government was spending on it. They are the basic main partner of it, and they've spent $100,000, and you might say, well, hey, for a big international conference, that's not so much. But the Crown Research Institutes, Ag Research, Scion, Plant and Food Research have also put significant money in, which we haven't got a proper feel for. If we put that to the side, because what's a conference cost, and it's interesting to know that, but our concern was that it was actually a push towards introducing genetic engineering into the New Zealand environment.
Okay, now yep. The purpose of the conference apparently is to get everybody together and to talk about where biotechnology is at. And proponents of biotechnology say, look, we've got to feed millions and millions more people real soon. Organics ain't going to cut it. We have to go down this road. What are you hearing at the conference?
I'm hearing some of that as well. The conference was designed to bring venture capital together with the scientists, and there's not too many regulators there, but New Zealand industry and the researchers. So that's happening. There's an element of mix there. I'm very much enjoying talking with people, finding out what their different types of biotechnology are and the different exciting things that they're developing, because it's not all genetic engineering. But this one has a strong element of genetic engineering in there, and we've got some major pushes saying you should be bringing it into New Zealand from the big heavyweights like Monsanto, DuPont, and the US State Department. So put those three together and you realise that there's some pressure. There'll be pressure on Wellington as well to look at regulation, loosening it up to allow GE into this country a lot more easily, and it's being sold through a few different ways. Now, if I talk about feeding the world, at the moment, 1/3 of the food produced in the world is wasted. And also there's some major companies that are manipulating that quite a lot. There's politics and there's economics are a major part in why the world isn't being fed well. And some of these companies that are there represent part of that problem. Can organics feed the world? Organics can feed the world, and it's been shown that particularly in those countries that are really or those parts of the world where the real pressures on population and feeding, such as Africa, are, it's been shown that organic, sustainable type methods are the ways that we're going to feed those people, because those are the truly sustainable ways. They're going to be fed better and for longer. If our population keeps going and going and going, no matter what system you use, we're going to have difficulty ultimately. So that the quality of food, of what we're doing with our land, the genuine sustainability, so that you can do year on year, decade on decade of production, that's what we need. GE doesn't cut it.
Do you see a sea change in the government view when it comes to genetic engineering, genetic modification, biotechnology?
I see the government pouring in tens and tens of millions still into GE, as they have done for the last couple of decades, for no gain. Taxpayers' money has been going into this fraught, risky technology, and we've had no gain from it. They're pushing hard on the ryegrass. That's seen as the easy entry for New Zealand because it's something that we appear to need. It's part of a strategy to get GE. Monsanto's not particularly interested in ryegrass. It'll pick it up because it's after the patent, it's after the control and the profit line of following through a technology. That's how they operate. But in New Zealand, that is seen as how we might be able to sell GE to New Zealanders. Go for something that's seen to be a need. We don't need it. We have just as effective, in fact, the breeding techniques that are normally used are where the huge gains in production have come from. All these companies do is put in a trait or a couple of traits, only a couple of genes out of the 30, 34,000 genes in a plant or whatever. They only put a couple in so they can get a patent. It's not about the agronomic benefits. That's coming from a good plant. They don't use bad plants to put their traits in. They use plants that are already improved anyway. And we've had massive gains, and we're still getting massive gains in terms of plant breeding. Recently,
you toured with 2 Australian farmers from the Monsanto family, if you like. What was their message?
Well, in terms of the Monsanto family, they've certainly... one of them said a word like Monsatan at one stage, so they're not quite from the family. Their real concern, and their concern for New Zealand, was that when GE canola was introduced into Australia in fairly recent years, there was some discussion about the risks of contamination to people that chose not to go down the GE path. You've got to remember, a lot of people that are proposing that we go down the GE path say it's a choice. We need farmers to have the choice. The trouble is, because of contamination is inevitable, and we've said that, coexistence between non-GE and GE is futile. It can't work. It's never worked ultimately. They said that, canola came in, bingo, there's contamination. So one of the farmers, there's a big rain event, as we're getting rather used to here. It washed material that was sitting waiting for harvest, had been cut for the canola to ripen properly. Flood event came along, washed stuff in 3 different directions, right through his property, across roads and all sorts, contaminating with GE seed a number of other properties. He couldn't grow non-GE seed anymore. It's $50 less a tonne for the farmer. It's a real cost to farmers. There's a more expensive seed, and so fair enough, if there's some benefits in the particular traits. I used to pay big money for organic seed, so I understand about paying big money for good seed. But ultimately, the end product is worth less. So someone that's chosen not to go down that track hasn't got choice. The choice is being taken away from them. Not only that, there is the potential for endpoint royalties to be charged on those that have been contaminated. The people that have been contaminated, they cannot sell their product as non-GM. And so even if you only got 1% contamination, 100% of your crop that goes into the storage unit ends up having to get $50 less a tonne, for example. That's not good news for farmers, and GE for New Zealand farmers. I'm concerned for family farmers in New Zealand. That's definitely not the way to go, and it's definitely not the way we want to be selling New Zealand Inc. in terms of our export markets.
Thanks, Steffan. Coming up after the break, Future Proof on the highways and byways of the economic world as our expert points out what's coming up. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Money Talks, and now it's time for Future Proof. What's on the radar for our guests? Steffan, before we get to that, I know you're very concerned about branding when it comes to GE and New Zealand.
Yes, we had a brand, 100% pure, or I say 100% pure Aotearoa New Zealand, and the Clean Green brand. We knew that it was a little bit of a crock in some respects, and we see issues in our environment that back that up. However, it was an aspirational brand that we're all very proud of. We're proud of nuclear free. GE free fits very, very, very well with that as well. Unfortunately, Tourism New Zealand has dropped that to New Zealand 100% pure U, which is a little bit meaningless. But the brand is effectively still there, and it's very, very important. We sell product on the animals grazing pastures. We sell product of the kiwi fruit and lovely images and the likes. Our consumers, our best value consumers internationally, don't want our animals grazing on a genetically engineered ryegrass. They don't want to be having butter that's been mucked around with genetic engineering. They want the natural product, and that is how we're best to position ourselves. We're a long way from a lot of the world, and we have a fantastic opportunity to use that brand to get best value, best returns. We cannot keep getting more and more and more production out of the same square metre, the same hectare. There's a limit ultimately to that. We're doing very, very well at expanding the growth on that, but ultimately it will be our brand and the quality of the product off that will give us our best value return to get those improved export dollars. And
gee, I wonder what the international customers will be thinking now with news that the PSA disease for our kiwi fruit has now hit not only Waikato last week, it's now also in Coromandel.
Yes.
This is not heartening, is it?
It's not heartening, and I'm very anxious about where this might go. The early signs this season, particularly with this incredibly wet season, windy, wet, all the wrong climatic features, getting into Hayward, getting into the replacement gold, very, very concerning.
Yeah, and now affecting more than, 1,300 orchards. When it comes to biosecurity, what's your reaction to the independent report into the disease, which basically said Ministry for Primary Industries, the industry itself, the growers, nobody seemed to know who was in charge. And perhaps this is why we are now faced with such a disaster.
Well, it's yet another disaster. We've put Varroa in terms of honey. We've had a whole rollout. I think MAF biosecurity has been under-resourced and maybe they're a little complacent. I think the people there, though, overall are working very hard to do the best that they can. We need to be doing far better around biosecurity. The current direction, the government's direction around biosecurity is not good enough. Because of free trade agreements, they say, well, hey, we have to take a certain amount of risk. We can't afford those risks because when you get something like PSA and Varroa or whatever, that is intergenerational. It's not just a wee risk, we do a big clean up or whatever if we can. We're bringing in problems that will last effectively forever.
And we know that Varroa mite came in 10 years ago. PSA, certainly we know now that it was around. Scientists were aware of it. I say, what's changed? I mean, 50% of our kiwi fruit crops now are infected.
I'm very, very worried for the kiwi fruit industry. It's an absolutely important part of horticulture in New Zealand. The main flag flyer, really. Pip fruit's not what it used to be. I'm not sure what the solution's going to be either. It's imperative that we put more and more resources into helping the kiwi fruit industry find solutions for that.
The government says it's doing a great job. It's doing the best it can. It is putting in more resources. Do you buy that?
I think they are putting in good resources. When I've met with kiwi fruit industry, they are happy with the response at this point. But I think we actually need to be looking at, okay, we're doing our best there. and there's good work going on there. But what are we going to do about stopping the next PSA, the next Varroa? We need to be putting more on there. We just cannot be having these continued incursions every few years, getting another major one that slams another industry in a heavy way. Government is putting it onto industry through the government-industry agreement process. In fact, when I go back to Parliament next week, we'll have the bill that's basically putting that in coming through. I don't think that's an adequate scenario, that GIA. Elements of it are, I can see that, but it's back into a sort of user pay thing, which is good in some aspects, but there's an overall issue at the border, regardless of the industry. It's not their fault if something's coming in. Invariably it's not. And so government needs to do more, better inspections, more thorough inspections, more people doing it, more science into it.
Steffan, quickly, before you go, what are you going to be keeping your eye on over the next 7 days? Where will your attention be?
Okay, well, I'm going back to the biotech conference, so we've got another couple of days.
You've got to be the loneliest guy at the conference, aren't you?
I'm enjoying the dialogue because there's a lot of innovation there that we can really use in New Zealand. There's some of the genetic engineering that I say you don't have in the environment, but you can have it deep in the lab. Some fantastic knowledge to be gained from that. But there's a number of other really innovative, valuable things that are being done through biotech, through our science institutes that are being represented at that conference. I will then be going back to Marlborough, to the New Zealand King Salmon case for a little bit. I'll probably be meeting with someone from Wakatu to do with one of their aquaculture applications and discussing some of that. So probably not a lot of rest, and then back into Wellington. I think we've got a patents bill that has got some real issues around possibly genetic engineering too, if I look at it carefully. Plant variety rights are lost in that. There's a biosecurity bill. So there's plenty on the plate. I think I'll get my head up and breathe somewhere in between.
Thanks, Steffan.
You're welcome.
Thanks to my special guest, Steffan Browning. Be sure to check out our website at country99tv.co.nz for the latest updates on rural developments at home and abroad. Meantime, Steffan, do you like jazz?
I do like jazz.
Great, because Kiwi jazz trio Hot Club Sandwich heads to your neck of the woods, the Marlborough Sounds, next month for a special concert. Check them out.
So tell me, how's the band and how's that little town you settled in? I can't remember what it's called, let's all have another gin. And I'll tell you how I met the all-black captain just last week. Maybe then you'll get a chance to speak. Or not, let's talk about me. Let's talk about me. I'm much more interesting than you. Let's talk about me. Let's talk about me. My life is fabulous, it's true. Let's talk about me. Let's talk about me. It's something that you all should do. Come on, that's enough about me. Let's talk about you. What do you think about me? Let's talk about me. About me, eh?
Keep the faith. See you next time.